to update members on work that officers are doing around this piece of work. Before we get started, just to advise the councillor, Robert Brown had agreed to chair this, but unfortunately Robert's not been able to make it this afternoon, so he'd asked me if I would just, given that there's not going to be any decisions made today, he'd asked me if it would be okay if I would just to chair the session, and I hope people are okay with that being the case. And if so, the presentation I was going to do, which is on the commissioning plan, Gillian Simpson, who's our partnership development liaison manager, is going to do that presentation on my behalf. If that's okay, then I think Nicola has already taken a sediment. The process this afternoon, because it's on Teams, will be if anyone's got questions to put their hands up on Teams, and Nicola will alert and I'll bring those questions in. And likewise, those who are in the room, if they're able to raise their hand in the normal way, we'll cover that as well. The session was split into three sort of sections. One is an update on the work streams that officers are doing around the commissioning plan, commissioning piece. The second area is around about an update from South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture on its budget position and savings for the proposed year. And then there will be time at the end for questions. We've got 2 hours against this, but I don't think we'll need anything like that amount of time. We'll probably might stop for questions after the first part where we talk about the three work streams and before Kay Morrison gives us an update on her financial position. So in terms of officer representation here, I'm joined up here with excuse me, Stephen Gibson. I've got Kay Morrison and Jackie Taylor, and joining us alongside there is Craig Jardine and Gillian Simpson. So we'll just start to move through the slides, give an update on these three pieces of work, and then we'll maybe stop for some questions there. And then the second half of the session will be an update from SLLC on its budget position and its proposals for the forthcoming year. Just in terms of background then, before I hand over to Stephen, a report was taken to the Performance Review and Scrutiny Forum on the 27th of August of this year, which outlined the approach being taken to ensure that we have a successful and impactful leisure and culture service that meets the aims and objectives of the Council, and that is more financially sustainable and that works towards the ambitions of net zero. As presented to the PRSF on the 27th of August, that manifests itself in three distinct work streams. The first work stream is a long-term estate strategy for the Council, which SLLC are intrinsically linked in to because of the amount of properties that South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture operate on the Council's behalf. The second work stream is around about a commissioning plan, and there's been some work in that space previously. That's around us determining our ask of SLLC and SLLC responding to that ask. And the third piece of work is around an agreed financial relationship between the Council and SLLC that tries to set a more secure and longer term approach to finance to help to avoid any sort of cliff edge financial decisions in the future. So with that, and with your indulgence, I will pass on to Stephen Gibson, who has a short presentation on the work being undertaken to date on the long-term estate strategy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairperson. Afternoon, everyone in the room. Afternoon, everybody online. And thanks for coming along today. So, as you'll know better than anyone, because you're all elected members, been here for a long time, the condition of the Council's assets, either managed directly by us or through our partners, has been discussed and reviewed regularly over many, many years. And even for me, it's a wee bit of deja vu. I'm pretty sure it's this time last year I was talking to you about a review of our asset base. And you have considered the future use of properties against a backdrop of changes potentially in the operating models, or maybe it's about achieving short-term savings. But this approach intends to be different, and I'm going to come on to that in a wee while. This time, with the requirements to meet net zero and operate in with what we all accept to be, I think, a very, very challenging financial environment. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. We can't continue to be reactive the way we've been in the past. And what we're, where we continue to, you're just thinking that short-term window. So this time, in response to these challenges, we're seeking to adopt a proactive approach and a portfolio-based approach to the estate strategy through the lens of this long-term estate strategy. But before I get started, and it's very, very important to stress this, I'll be talking a lot today about estate and about property, but please don't get confused from our perspective on this. This is equal about people, and it's about communities, and it's about making sure that our service delivery is fit for the future. It's about making sure that future service provision is accessible. It's about making sure it's equitable, it's right-sized and affordable, and reflects the future role of this local authority. So if I could move on to the first slide, please, because I've not even started yet. Right. This slide sets out the strategic intentions or the guiding principles that we're working towards through this approach. Firstly, we're promoting a long-term strategic and outcome-based approach, and that's with the intention of guiding future decision-making through a strategic lens, and I'm hearing myself feeding back.
Can't see any slides, Stephen.
Right, don't understand. No.
We're just going to see if we can get that sorted. Bear with us a wee second. Nicola, she shared it on the screen with that. What?
That was going to make my presentation really easy without slides as well.
Are people seeing slides now online?
Yeah, that's better.
Just tell me when it's good to go. So we should be on that slide that says strategic intentions.
This, I think it's showing.
Yeah, slide 1, the vision for future relationship.
Nearly.
Can I ask, are people able to see the sort of notes on that, or is it just the actual slide itself?
Just the slide.
Right, okay, that's fine then. We'll work off that basis. Yeah.
Right. Our folk. But it's not a right slide, David.
Seems to have jumped to 16 now.
Right, I think that's us now. Strategic intentions. Let me know when you've got that.
Yep, that's
Yes,
what
I
we
have
can
that.
see.
Cool, right, thanks very much. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So this slide summarises the strategic intentions or the guiding principles which kind of underpin the approach that we're taking. Firstly, rather than being reactive, we propose to take a long-term strategic approach. It's going to be outcome-focused with the intention of guiding future decisions through a strategic lens, which ties the estate strategy into our broad range of strategies in particular, and with the community plan, with our IT strategy, and a whole host of strategies and approaches that cut across the council. For obvious reasons, with a strategic focus on net zero, the intention is to reduce the council's environmental footprint through the renovation or the disinvestment in energy inefficient buildings and the adoptions of renewable energy approaches wherever that's possible. With a big focus on service delivery, the strategy is a strong focus on this, helping us to provide more efficient and accessible services. It will take account of the very diverse nature of our area of operation, the rural and the urban areas, and the needs of our various communities and people who live, work and operate within South Lanarkshire. Importantly, one of the key strategic intentions is to improve the quality of our future core estate. We've talked about it before. We've got to do that. What we'll be doing is creating a modern core estate and with adaptable spaces that can accommodate just the evolving services that come through in the future and promote that integrated joint working with across the services within the council, but with other partner organisations. Fifth intention is about, where possible, to revitalise or repurpose existing properties. We think that's going to help us attract investment and stimulate local level regeneration. This work will obviously complement what's going on in the economic development strategies in the various town centres. And the obvious ones are going to be, of course, East Kilbride and Rutherglen. But of course, when we talk about town centres, we mean in rural areas as well. It's not just in the big urban areas. Not surprisingly, one of the intentions is finance-based. And of course, that's in the context of that very challenging financial position that we find ourselves in. We'll need to, whatever we do needs to contribute to the council's funding gap over the next 3 to 5 years. And by reducing that future capital and revenue requirements, we think that it's going to make a big difference. And Jackie's going to pick that up soon. But I think from the outset, what we need to be is being open and transparent when we're talking about this. We are talking about making savings, and to achieve that, we're going to talk about a modern core estate, which will be smaller and more efficient. Finally, and very importantly, this bullet point's about communication and consultation with all our stakeholders, I should say. We're providing information on the 10-year approach, seeking views on the future requirements, being very transparent about what we're doing, when we're doing, and why we're doing it. And what we're trying to do through that, and as apart from being transparent, it's to give confidence about the future. So that no matter where you stay and what services you get just now, you can be assured that, despite your relationship with the council, that this approach should be, at a strategic level, should be trying to make sure that service delivery gets improved through the new property portfolio. If we could move on. It's just a wee bit slow catch up. Thanks. Big gap. So take account of the guiding principles I talked about. The key output from this work stream is going to be the development of a 10-year estate strategy. And what we believe is that estate strategy is going to allow us to take a balanced and long-term approach to guide future decision-making. Rather than being reactive and focusing too much on buildings and property, it's going to promote a proactive approach to decision-making on the investment, the rationalisation and the co-location of services, and inevitably the disposal of some assets. But this will be based on property, people and place-based factors. We want to take that rounded approach. The estate strategy should also direct investment into a reduced but higher quality, and importantly, a more energy efficient, I should say, core estate. Either investing in or disposing of energy inefficient buildings and facilitating that journey towards net zero. I'm not saying that we're going to completely get to net zero, and we'll come on to that later on. We talk about finances, because the cost of it is huge and the funding landscape is very, very challenging, but it will take us on that journey towards net zero. Again, using one public estate principles, which is widely adopted elsewhere in the UK, we'll explore opportunities to integrate service delivery and work collaboratively with other public sector bodies to try and share services under one roof, make services accessible, and at the same time make savings, and try and make savings and try and make services as accessible to local people as far as we possibly can. And finally, we'll identify sources for external funding to invest in the future core estate. The idea being that, if we take this strategic approach and this long-term vision, we think we're ahead of the game in terms of where our peers are. In fact, we're pretty confident of that. If we can get a strategic approach and get our ducks in line, we think we're going to get a competitive edge when applying for funding. which will allow us to, identify a pipeline of projects and start to deliver on that journey towards net zero. So the next slide is about approach. That's much quicker. Thanks very much. So this slide summarises the approach, and what I would say is we've already been to the Performance Review and Scrutiny Forum, and as we told them at that time, it's an approach which takes place over 3 phases. The first phase has already started, it's in progress. We're using a very wide range of data from traditional sources, the one you'd expect from a traditional property perspective, usage, cost, income and expenditure, location and so on. And we're doing that already, and we're feeding that into the machine. But to make sure that the recommendations that we make as a consequence are aligned to the broader people-based, the place-based and social responsibilities that are, of course, part of the community plan, we're going to be evaluating performance of every asset from a consistent and a structured approach and a set of criteria that, again, was noted by the forum. So in addition to cost effectiveness and utilisation, which you'd expect, the criteria are going to involve sustainability factors, service delivery factors and placemaking to make sure that when we come back to the recommendations for that smaller, modern core estate, you can be assured that what we're doing is taking that rounded approach. We're considering absolutely everything. But the main output from phase 1 will be an initial scoring of every property owned by the council. Now, that's irrespective of if it's managed by us, managed by the trust, or managed by the IJB, or every asset's going to be in scope. And when complete, the scoring exercise will give, at that stage, just an indication of the buildings which fall into being one of the following. Now, as I said, moving forward, what we want to identify is a future model with a future core estate. And so the properties through this model will be broken into either core assets, flex assets, or other assets. The core assets will be assets which, through the modelling, perform well against the criteria, and these would be assets that the council would want to hold on to into the long term and invest in into the future, because they, considering the property-based criteria and the place-based criteria and people-based criteria, they fit the modelling best, and they're the ones we'd want to invest in. The flex assets fit somewhere in the middle. They don't quite hit the target for being within core estate, but are assets that could be retained over a period of time until such times as they could move either to being a core asset or into others. And other assets are assets that just can't economically be upgraded to meet our future service requirements. And these are assets which score low in terms of property factors or people and sustainability-based factors. And these are properties which, subject to approval, would be maintained to minimum standards until a sustainable solution can be implemented. And that sustainable solution, of course, might be disinvestment, and it may be disposal, but that's something that will come later on. If we could move on to the last slide. Oh, sorry, no, in fact, I'm not ready to move on to the last slide. Sorry about that. So phase 2, apologies for that, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Phase 2 of the 3 phases utilises the data gathered from phase 1. It explores and identifies potential sources of funding that could be used. And phase 2 is going to call what we're calling a proposed priorities pipeline of projects, which, if I say it slowly, is PPPP. So I'll need to think of a new name because I didn't think that out particularly well. But you get the gist of it. These prioritised projects are going to be having gone through the Mincer when we've created a score for every asset, when we've worked in the property-based factors and the people and place-based factors. We rank and score every property. And then for the properties which become core, what we need to do is try and align them to funding streams which become available. And again, by taking this long-term strategic approach, we think that's going to give us a competitive edge, and we'll be better placed than most of our peers in attracting that long-term funding. Phase 3 is in the short term, the final phase. And using all the information we get from phase 1 and phase 2, what we're doing is developing and implementing that 10-year strategy. But along with the strategy will come a 10-year action plan. And that action plan will be reported to committee. It will include key milestones. It will identify who's taking responsibility and give a very, very clear indication of what we're doing, where we're doing it, and how we're going to do it, and where the money is going to be coming from. But now, if I could move on to the final slide, please. Very short one, just talking about timescales. As I said, we've already been to the scrutiny forum and given an indication of what we're doing and how we intend to do it. After today, there are 2 key milestones within a fairly short period of time. An initial report is going to go to the executive committee in March, and a final report goes to committee in June of next year. And after that, subject to approval, we'll implement the strategy and we'll start to roll out the strategy and the action plan. And although it doesn't say it in terms of timescales, my expectation would be as a minimum, there'd be an annual review of the action plan to give an update on where we are in terms of progress and to give assurance that we're on track to meet our milestones and to take us along that journey to meet net zero. And that's kind of all I've got to say at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Stephen. Members, as I said, with your indulgence, we'll go through the 3 presentations. Stephen's was because of the content and the large amount of work involved was the longest of them, but by going through the 3 presentations and then taking questions, hopefully you start to see how these 3 pieces of work start to intertwine to give a kind of more cohesive approach to this review. So I'm now going to ask Gillian Simpson, Partnership Liaison Manager within Community Enterprise Resources, who's leading former resource on some of the commissioning work, to talk us through an update on where that's got to today. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and apologies about the IT. Don't know whose idea it was to put me in charge of it. We'll not do that again. But no, welcome everyone. So in terms of the commissioning plan, then that will effectively become the overarching strategic document between the Council and SLLC, and it will set out our ambitions for a successful and impactful leisure and culture services that contributes towards improving the health and well-being of communities across South Lanarkshire. The plan will describe the commissioning arrangements between the Council and SLLC and will recognise SLLC as a strategic player and the sole provider of leisure and culture services on our behalf. The purpose of the plan is ultimately to define the Council's ask of SLLC in the form of high-level strategic intentions. So what do we need from this partnership to help us achieve our ambitions as a Council? And these strategic intentions will, of course, need to align closely with the Council plan and the strategic themes within the Community Plan Partnership, enabling the Council to periodically reflect on its own priorities and identify through this plan which services, programmes and projects should be prioritised. The development of a commissioning plan will also help to provide some strategic direction to SLLC so that they can ensure that the resources available to them are directed in the right way to meet the needs of the people of South Lanarkshire. Although not a legal document itself, the plan will help to define the legal relationship between the Council and SLLC by aligning a full suite of legal documents. All the SLAs and various other legal documents that are in place will all be gathered as part of this commissioning plan to clarify the legal requirements of each organisation. In terms of the strategic intentions themselves, we're still currently developing these at the moment, and it would be good to get views from members today. But there are really 3 probably main areas of focus. So the first one being is about harnessing the important contribution that leisure and culture services make in relation to health and wellbeing, learning and disadvantage. So SLLC already deliver a huge range of programmes, projects and initiatives which benefit the population of South Lanarkshire in general, and also targeting those areas of inequality, etc. So it's important that we harness that as much as we possibly can through the commissioning plan and how we demonstrate achievement of the commissioning plan and the strategic aims. We want to make sure that the resources available to us are put to the best use possible. The second part is about recognising that the current level and variety of general service provision may need to be reduced over time in line with the resources available, and potentially to focus more on the targeted groups, things like rural isolation, people with disabilities, partnerships with social work, health, education, deprivation, all of these different target groups. So as a strategic document, the commission plan won't set out the detail of what that would look like, but it would create the framework for improving this and informing this thinking with decisions in this area aligned to the annual budget and setting process and savings proposals process. The third one there is about asking SLLC to support the Council to deliver its priorities, whilst also being mindful of the fact that SLLC have got their own charitable objectives that they must adhere to. Underlying all of these intentions is, of course, the need for SLLC to continue to ensure high standards of governance and quality assurance. The final slide on this work stream is about how we would expect SLLC to respond to that ask. And that in essence will be through the development of their own 5-year strategy, which we would be expecting to align with our strategic intentions. We'll also be developing a performance management framework sitting alongside the commissioning plan, and that will ask SLLC to demonstrate the outcomes being achieved. It'll be an outcomes focused framework. And we will report this periodically through to various committees, but the detail of that is still to be worked through. That's where we're at in terms of the commissioning plan.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and councillors might note that as Gillian is going through that, you can start to see how that might align with the estate strategy in terms of our ask would be tailored depending on what the extent to which and the condition of our estate. With that, I'll move on to the third of the initial presentations, and that's from Jackie Taylor around about the developing financial relationship. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Excuse me. Hello, everybody. In terms of this particular stream of the review, this is about how we consider and develop the financial relationship between the council and the Leisure Trust. We know that the council is SLLC's main funder, and it's key that we work in partnership together around financial issues. It's important that we're able to work together and develop that relationship, and that ultimately affects how services are delivered and what services can be delivered. Very much this links in with the slides that Kay will cover in the next part of the session around the leisure budget and their plans going forward. In any situation, be it the council's budget, leisure's budget, or an external organisation, it's more than preferable to make sure that we've got a planned approach to operations and also the financial planning. And that financial planning plays a very big part in that ability to plan. It's been mentioned a few times already, but I can't reiterate enough the interdependency between this stream of work and also the pieces of work that David and Stephen have talked about, in fact, sorry, Gillian and Stephen have talked about around our estate work and also the commissioning piece for leisure. But move on to the next slide. Thanks, Gillian. As I've mentioned the word partner a few times already, this review is very much a partner approach with the council and with leisure, and it links really, really closely, as I say, to Kay's presentation around the budget plans. Key outcomes for a successful relationship, and the key outcomes from this stream, very much about financial sustainability for SLLC. We're all very aware of the council's financial position. It's been tough and it continues to be tough going forward. We've seen cuts in the council over years, and there's still great uncertainty going forward in terms of our financial position. Leisure are no different. They are also having to deal with financial challenges. And it's important that they're able to consider and plan their sustainability in difficult financial times. And that relationship between the council and leisure in that space is really important. And that includes this plan, this aim to have longer term ambitions around financial planning. That's good practice, and that helps both parties understand the challenges faced, and it helps accountability on both sides as well. Obviously, leisure have to plan for the future, and as a commercial operation, it's key that expansion and investment helps with that ambition. And again, having that financial relationship with the council and that sustainability themselves helps leisure do that. Very much reserves and resilience is linked to sustainability. That includes the ability to weather storms that will appear in the leisure space, be that on a day-to-day basis where challenges around perhaps having to make repairs or even bigger issues around financial challenges like pay awards have to be dealt with. And the ability for the council and leisure to work together on their financial relationship means that leisure are more able to deal with those challenges, and the reliance on the council is perhaps less than needs to be. It is right that leisure have that ability to build resilience through a level of reserves. And we all know that savings are difficult, be it in the council space or in the leisure space. And what we want to do is make sure we're in the best place possible to manage budget and business decisions. So in terms of where we are, in terms of this particular stream, Kay will talk around our budget plans shortly. What that means is we can help deliver on the outcomes that I mentioned in that previous slide. The council's input into leisure is predominantly financially through the management fee, and I've mentioned the challenging position that the council faces financially, and we have had to propose and agree cuts to the management fee in the past for leisure. We don't have any certainty going forward that we'll not have to do that again, and therefore the ability for the council and leisure to consider options is key, and building that relationship will help with that. Ultimately, leisure have to balance their budget in the same way as the council does, and there's challenging times ahead. But through building that financial relationship and better long-term planning, both the council and leisure can make sure that there's an understanding and transparency from a financial perspective in that space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. And Kay, I think you're just going to finish off this section of the slides before we have it open for questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. So just to follow up on the general outline that Jackie's provided there, what I'm hoping to do is just talk through what we think this 3-year plan will look like. So this is a shift from short-term year-on-year budget planning, shifting into a 3-year budget plan, so shifting into more medium-term. And I'll talk through what that looks like and what we think that might look like as it stands just now. So as we've covered, and as I know everybody will be aware, the recent financial challenges, similar of course to those faced by the council, have seen savings requirements of over £10 million having to be made by South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture in the past 2 years, with the organisations and the communities feeling the impact of that. The move then from short-term year-on-year planning to more medium-term enables more improved planning and joined-up approaches to address future budget gaps. And it is where we want to be moving forward, and it is a welcome and a positive step in that regard. Having developed a 3-year finance plan, what is reassuring is that there is a more sustainable business model underpinning the service provision. The exceptional circumstances of the last 2 years have really skewed that, with significant increases in utility costs, pay awards, etc., adding millions to that budget gap in those past 2 years. When we developed the plan, what we saw was that in a typical year, the budget would tend to sit at a level, the budget gap, would tend to sit at a level that could be addressed through a reasonable level of increased income generation. More is what you would expect to see with most organisations, which is really encouraging. Looking ahead, we see that in year 1, we have a projected budget gap of around £481,000, far lower than those previous 2 years. In year 2 of the plan, the pension contributions rise kicks in. So the pension contribution rises from 6.5% to 17.5%, as we know it is doing for the council too. What that does for SLLC is that adds a pressure to the budget of an additional £2.1 million and increases the budget gap in year 2 to £2.5 million, which is, of course, significant. In year 3, we see the projected budget gap reduce back to those more manageable levels, with a projected budget gap in year 3 of around £377,000. Over the course of the 3-year plan, SLLC would require to make circa £3.3 million of savings to balance the budget over that 3-year period. That's based on a fixed management fee from South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture over that 3-year period, no increase or reduction. It supports us to absorb the rising costs of that continued service provision, that 3.3 million over that time frame, including the significant increase in the pension contributions that we know impact in year 2. The model allows time to grow commercial areas of the business in a meaningful and a sustainable way. Since the initial development of the plan, we now know that employer national insurance contributions will increase. And if there were to be no provision made to cover this for SLLC, this adds an additional pressure of around £637,000 to the budget gap for the immediate coming year, and it increases the budget gap for future years accordingly, increasing that total budget gap over those 3 years to £4 million if there were to be no provision made for that. So with a static management fee over the 3-year period, SLLC absorbing the increased pension contributions, pay awards, increased cost of service provision, etc., we would require to find £3.3 million of savings over that 3-year period. And if there were no provision made for the increase in the employer's national insurance contributions, that increases to £4 million and further exacerbates that year 2 pressure that already impacted by the pension increase. However, reflecting what Jackie's mentioned there also and acknowledging council budget pressures too, well, other scenario planning has been undertaken. So that really has been based on considering what that budget gap implications might look like if the council were to reduce the management fee also over that time. The modelling developed was based on the assumption of a £500,000 reduction to the management fee in year 2 and a further £500,000 reduction again in year 3. So this scenario increases the budget gap that would be required to be addressed over those 3 years to £4.3 million, and that's without accounting for the employer national insurance contributions at this stage. So this model provides a static management fee in year 1, which then reduces in year 2. That is at the same time that we know that we will have a significant pressure around pension contributions, and it would reduce again further in year 3. It allows less time to grow some of the commercial areas of business before then addressing larger budget gaps. So how would we address any budget gap over those 3 years, appreciating that the level of that is dependent upon management fee, etc. So broadly speaking, the budget gap for year 1 would be addressed through increasing income generation, transformational savings, some of those being linked to the transformation projects being implemented, and general efficiencies. And I'll go into that in the savings for the coming year in a little bit more detail shortly. In year 2, where there is a projected gap of £2.5 million, actions required to address that gap will be undertaken by ourselves, and as covered a couple of times already through the presentation, the interdependency of the work streams with the estate strategy and the commissioning plan will also require to feature in the budget considerations. A continuation of the actions that we'll take in year 1, along with additional savings that we're anticipating following what will become a more detailed review of our sites, following the implementation of some of the new technology that we think will help streamline. There's also the potential for any utility savings to be used to contribute towards addressing that pension peak in year 2. However, it probably is important to note that would be a one-off basis to help cover that and would then need to be addressed on a recurring basis in year 3 if that were the case. So the pressure still requires to be addressed, but it would give a little longer to do that. And the other way we would look to address that gap in year 2 would really be a bit more of a heavier focus around commercialisation and income generation. So it's anticipated that the growth plan that we've been developing will identify further opportunities to generate and diversify the income streams. And again, I'll cover that a little bit further on in the presentation too. And in year 3, if we were to assume that the impact of the pension contributions is covered and addressed in year 2, in a recurring way, that would see that year 3 budget gap reduced significantly to £377,000 that would require to be addressed. However, if the utilities benefit was used as a one-off to offset that pension peak in year 2, that would require to be addressed in year 3 and would increase that budget gap somewhat in year 3 too. I appreciate there's quite a lot in there in the mix actually, and so I suppose just by way of a brief summary just now, what we have seen across SLLC is a requirement to save £10 million over the previous 2 years. That move from the short-term year-on-year planning, shifting into more medium-term planning, is where we want to be moving forward, and it is a really positive and welcome step, as Jackie's outlined, the joint working around that. The other thing I would probably just recap on is that there is a more sustainable business model that underpins the service provision, out with some of those major exceptions that have really skewed that in the last 2 years. We do, of course, appreciate this is all dependent upon the level of certainty that the council can provide around the management fee over a 3-year period, and that any decision regarding the level of that management fee provided to ourselves would require council budget approval.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. So, councillors, we've thrown up quite a lot of information at you there. As Kate's just described, it's been a difficult last couple of years for South Lanarkshire Leisure Culture, as it has been for the council, just in the current financial environment that we need to work in, and there remain to be difficult times ahead in terms for both organisations, but hopefully you can see that there's a lot of work happening in that space at the moment. So I'll open up for questions, and I'm going to ask Nicola to keep me right around about the order. I think I've got Councillor John Ross is first who's online. John, do you want to come in?
Yes, can you hear me, David?
Yes, we can, Councillor Ross, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank everyone for the presentation. If I can maybe just go back to Stephen's initial presentation, I get huge feelings of déjà vu, because what he was describing was practically the very same as what we undertook when we were in administration several years ago, when we undertook the very same look at everything that we had on the books and its potential going forward. Unfortunately, that had to be stopped by somebody because the leader divulged the information. But that apart, it sounds to me as if we're going through the very same situation again, which I have nothing against. I think that it's a very necessary thing that we have to do. Will there be, how will we be reporting this? Will it be kept confidential? Will it be open for everyone to see just exactly what's happening there? That's probably all I've got to say in that item. But the rest of it seems very, especially when Kay was talking about the present situation, I understand it is very difficult for SLLC, but it seemed to me as if they were throwing a lot of balls up into the air and hoping to keep as many of them up there as possible without knowing how many of them were going to actually land on the ground. And I will be very interested in seeing a wee bit more sort of meat on the bone as we go forward to see whether, I mean, I don't know if in fact SLLC's been able to make savings in the past or to make progress on the commercial side enough to cover everything that Kay's been talking about. So I would be assured if at some point we can see some more hard and fast figures about where we think we're actually going to be taking into consideration all the improbables that we've just been mentioned. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ross. So there was kind of two points there. One for Stephen, who will take first, and then if Kay wants to come in on your sort of second point around the finances. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ross. I'll not comment on the first part of what you said. I wasn't here a few years ago, but I can certainly, I mean, as I said at the beginning, it feels a wee like déjà vu only because we did talk about it this time last year, but I'm confident that the approach that we're taking this time is going to be different because of the very rounded way we're doing it, where we're considering people and property factors as well as place and sustainability. We're really taking that rounded view. But the main point in your question was about openness, transparency, confidentiality. And that was actually in the presentation in the second slide, which we will share, because communication is one of the guiding principles. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We need to be very open and very transparent about what we're doing, when we're doing it, and how we're doing it, and why we're doing it. We need to be open and say that, you know, we are moving towards a smaller but much higher quality core estate, which will be energy efficient and will be matching the future requirements of people who live, work and do business in South Lanarkshire. But in terms of how we're going to report it, there are two main reports coming your way. The first is coming in March, will go to Executive Committee, and then a final report will go to Executive Committee in June. But in terms of confidentiality, what I would say is that after the first report, in fact, as part of the first report, we'll give a good indication of consultation strategy. And I expect that consultation will start probably by mid-March, immediately after that report. I've got the bones of a consultation strategy. It's still work in progress. We're still working with colleagues and comms, but that'll be part of the report, which will go to committee in March. And that's going to probably confirm that we'll start consultation between March and May, in advance of going back to committee in June. So this will be a really exciting and challenging process, but one which I think will put us in a better place into the future. And there's going to be full disclosure. We're going to be speaking to people, and we'll be trying to get as many views as possible along the way. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thank you very much, Stephen. And it's worth pointing out this is a South Lanarkshire Council-wide strategy, isn't it, rather than just a SLLC?
Oh, listen, no doubt about it.
Okay, thank you. Kay, do you want to come in?
Thanks for that. Yeah, I suppose just to pick up on the points around, any queries around progress that we're making in terms of the commercial aspects of the business, and also flagging some of the improbables that are included in what I've covered there. The improbables included in there are predominantly external factors, and the similar external factors that are bearing down on the council as well. What we do have certainty in is in our actions that are being developed. We know that the actions that we took last year have delivered, and we know that in terms of coming out on balanced budget and projections and things around that. So there's a real confidence we can take in that. There's definitely more to do. We're aggressively going to be pursuing that over the course of this 3-year plan. And hopefully the remainder of the presentation that I come on to will pad some of that out just a little bit more for the councillor in terms of some of the specific avenues that we're going to be pursuing around diversifying income streams, targeting new markets, etc. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kay. So in terms of the order of questions, I've got Councillor Falconer next, and then Councillor Watson, and then Councillor Shearer. So Councillor Falconer, I'll take you first. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. It's just on Stephen's presentation, the estate strategy, the 5th bullet point, explore opportunities working collaboratively with other public sector bodies and promote community asset. I've just left the meeting, a community asset transfer in Hull House, where the tenants group are looking to take over a former day centre. And we had a very good presentation being Mulholland. But what was highlighted, the legal responsibilities that these groups will have, and also their capacity for doing things. And as a council, I think we should be running courses through our legal department for community groups to come in and see what is required to run it, instead of going to individual groups. And also the issue of having to do a business plan. When I mentioned about Vasland, I was told they don't do it. I mean, Vasland have got more staff than we've got home helps. But why there no assisting community groups to do business plans? The other ones, I say, our new legal officer who's been presenting various things to the councillors. It'd be handy for community groups to be brought in to get a presentation with slides, how they'd go about it, because I didn't realise how much responsibility is cost with a community asset. And I've got to say, and not to hang me the group, it worries me when we look at community asset transfers, is that if a council our size, with our budget and our amount of employees, can't run something, how are we expecting a voluntary community group to do it after the first year? Thank you.
So I was going to bring Stephen in there. I do think there's some merit in what you say, Councillor Faulkner, in terms of us helping build that capacity up with community groups. I think there's definitely something in there that we could take forward. Stephen, do you want to come in?
Thanks for that. Listen, thanks very much. And you're right. There are some halls which will be difficult for groups to take over. Of that, I'm quite sure. But then again, there are others where we've got really well-developed groups, and we're seeing an example of that coming through. I've lost count of the amount of concessionary leases that were approved by the Housing and Technical Resource Committee this year. And I know that in the final quarter financial year, we've got loads coming through between January, February and March, which will be coming through from a wide variety of groups who are in different stages of moving into that commerciality and that community ownership. But listen, you're right. Every group has a different challenges, whether because of the nature of the building, the type of services they'll be hoping to run, the income expenditure that's associated with that. So I agree with David, and I agree with yourself that there has to be a degree of maturity on that to make sure that people will take over the buildings, and they do it in an informed way, eyes wide open, and are not set up to fail. And that's not our. We obviously don't want to do that either.
Supplementary, Chair. Just a point when Stephen mentioned earlier about energy efficiency. I'm just wondering if the council have been approached regarding putting solar panels on their buildings to generate power, which the excess of power can be fed into the national grid, making an income. because I understand Dundee, Edinburgh and one other council have done that. Have we had any approaches in that direction?
It's when you say approaches, I don't know what you mean by approaches, but is it something that we do? And the answer to that is yes, it's something that we're already doing. I'm not convinced that we sell it back to the grid because there's a lot of talk about that, but not an awful lot of money generated as a consequence of that. What most people do is put on solar panels, and if they can, get some battery storage, because that's probably the most efficient way. But it's something that we're already doing, and certainly moving forward, it'll be part of our estate strategy when we're talking about renewable sources. There's no doubt about it. Same thing, it's going to go for a housing stock as well. It's going to be built into our programmes for way into the future. But I mean, that's all stuff that we're sighted on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you very much, Councillor Faulkner. I'll move on now to Councillor David Watson. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. There's an awful lot to unpick in that, and I don't think we're going to do it justice today. But a couple of things that have jumped out at me though, that, and Stephen probably getting the short straw today, that, and I'll go further back than what Councillor Ross was suggesting. In my time in this council, I don't know how many reviews we've had of our assets and nothing's ever come of them. So good luck with it, and I hope it does come to fruition and it's something meaningful that we can utilise, because if we go in the previous record, there must be reports gathering dust all over the council. Touching on the asset transfers, which was mentioned, and I've been disturbed in the last week to hear of 2 instances in East Kilbride, and I haven't dug deep enough to find out if they're accurate or not. But in one proposed asset transfer, there's issues with asbestos, and another one, issues with the roof, which would be a massive liability for the group concerned. And it worries me that we're pursuing asset transfers with groups with maybe massive underlying issues that we should know about, but these groups aren't being made aware of them. So I'll maybe get a response on that. And on to the actual commissioning plan, I think we'd all acknowledge that sports, arts and leisure enrich our community's lives and play an important role in what we are trying to do through our strategies and health and well-being. But facilities are required for that, and it's all right saying we've got clubs and organisations, but clubs and organisations need support with facilities, and I hope that's getting factored into this. And maybe just one off the top of my head would be like athletics clubs that, you know, they need athletics tracks to run on, and that's not a hall, but it's an actual facility. Football clubs need football pitches to play on, so that needs to be built into that strategy. And also, I would like to see in the strategy, what is the preventative spend that leisure and culture can deliver in support of the NHS, the council and the IJB, because there's massive opportunities there that leisure and culture can be delivering that could help some preventative spend further down the line. And probably just finally at the moment would be, mention was increased income generation. And I know there's a slide there, but I'm not quite sure where it's going, because I'm sure all these things have been tried in the past, but external funding as a charity has got to be a key one. I mean, there's talk of external funders, Sports Scotland and Creative Scotland. Their budgets are squeezed as well, and they've been funders of programmes within leisure and culture for years. But is there options to take out there and find alternative funding as a charity? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. So I picked up 4 distinct sort of questions there. One is around about the condition of properties at point of transfer. The second one was around about things like in the commissioning plan about taking account of not just halls and facilities, but athletics tracks and that wider kind of range of leisure and cultural provision. The third one was around about preventative spend, and the fourth was around about income generation. I think Kay's going to be coming and talking to us about income generation a bit more detail in her presentation in the second half of this. So if it's okay if we could do that. In terms of, if I can cover your second point about the commissioning plan, and then I might ask Stephen to cover the thing about the condition of properties, and then Kay might have some insight into the space around preventative spend. I do think there is Gillian in the presentation of the commission plan that teases that out is about a decision for us as a council and as councillors to understand and to make is to say, well, actually, how much of general provision do we want to see that is just there and available for our communities when compared to how much do we want out of the money that we put into South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture to direct towards specific areas such as, rural deprivation or type 2 diabetes or something like that. So I think we're hoping to bring that out through the commissioning plan. But I don't, and Kay might come in on this as well, and Stephen as well, but I don't foresee us being in a position where we won't try to keep a good level of that provision to provide that wide range of access to things like athletics and other sports as well. But I'll ask Stephen to come in and then Kay.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. I don't think I've drawn the short straw, but it was understood that there's going to be a lot of questions on this one. The first part of it, you asked about two specific transfers, and obviously I'm not going to talk about them. I would say Craig's here today. I would ask you just to speak to Craig about the two transfers that are ongoing just now, and we can keep that separate. But on the wider stuff, I'm probably not going to be dusting down anything we've done previously. Because I am confident that this is different. It's previous approaches to this haven't been so focused on people, on place and sustainability, haven't been so closely tied to community planning, and probably been far too much focused on property and buildings and finance. Now, finance is vitally important here. There's no getting away from it. We've got a massive funding gap. There's nobody in the room and nobody on the call who doesn't know about it and doesn't probably accept. In fact, we need to accept that we're going to have to make savings, substantial savings over the next 4 years, and there'll be expectations that some of that's going to come from this exercise. But that's not to say that what comes out the other end isn't going to be really, really exciting. And I'm absolutely, rather than looking back the way and looking at what's not worked in the past, we're just completely focused and looking to the future. And first 6 months, getting to a point where we deliver a really good, solid strategy that picks up in good practice, not just in Scotland, obviously, because we think we're ahead of the game, but in the UK and abroad, we're really, really confident about that. But in terms of, again, about the condition that properties would potentially be handed over to community groups, and that's going to be part of the strategy. There's absolutely no doubt about it. If a property doesn't fit within the core approach, and is either in flex or other, there will be chances and opportunities where community groups would come forward looking for perhaps for a concessionary lease. Given the financial challenges facing the council, I don't think it would be wrong to give any impression that what we're going to do is spend a huge amount of money and bring properties up to standard. What we're talking about is maintaining them to a minimum level, and then handing over, it'll be to a tenable standard where a property can be insured. But we're happy to give, as Councillor Faulkner said, groups need to get into their eyes open. We're happy to give advice, but that's probably my response to that part of the question, if that's okay.
Thank you much. And Kay, do you want to come in on preventative spend?
Thanks for that. Yes, I absolutely take the point in preventative spend, and as you can imagine, I'm delighted that somebody's mentioning that as well, given what we aim to do, particularly around the health and wellbeing agenda. We do elements of that, as I'm sure you'll be aware, and others will maybe be aware, but I know not necessarily everybody. We do a lot of that through the GP referral programme, and we link in around that, and that's about patients that are suffering from long-term conditions, chronic conditions, rehab, prehab, etc., and offering activity programmes of the levels that are suitable and safe for participants in order to help build up around that. There's a prevention piece as well. We do that through healthy weight management, that type of thing that helps with prevention around the diabetes piece. What I would say is actually the majority, out with specific projects and programmes, the majority of what we do is preventative. Everybody who steps into a leisure centre, actually anybody that's taken part in any of our cultural activities, these all support mental health and well-being as well. And I know that we often we focus on the physical activity side, particularly when we seem to talk about our services. So the preventative piece is underway. We do want to expand that. We've had many conversations around that, and it is an area that our sector across the country is really keen to expand. The difficulty is in it, and I have full understanding and appreciation of this, is that a lot of the funding is pushed into acute care, and we know that. And really that requires somebody to take a decision to flip the switch and say, I'm going to put less money into acute care and I'm going to pop it over here into preventative care. Now, I would be delighted if it happened, but I'm not the one that has to make that very, very difficult choice. What I would say is I think here, particularly across South Lanarkshire, and I know the council's just had a really successful Marmotplace application, and you'll see within that and that framework and that approach, it does talk about prevention, early intervention as well. And we're round a table with other officers across the council and other organisations and part of that community planning partnership to look at how do we maybe shift some focus and some resource into some of these areas to see if we can expand in the prevention piece too. So it is something that is really, really high on our agenda. I do think the Marmotplace and the successful application that the council's had is excellent news, and hopefully will be a really good catalyst to help take that forward across South Lanarkshire, not just in what we do, but across the whole of South Lanarkshire for those particularly those health and wellbeing outcomes.
Okay, thank you very much, Kay, for that. I'll move on. I've got Councillor Shearer next, and then I've got Councillor Walker's. I can see her light up. I think that's it. And then after that, if there's no any further questions, we'll maybe ask Kay if she can talk through the second part of the presentation, because there may be some questions that come out as a result of that. So with that, I'll Councillor Shearer, if you want to come in, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'd like to ask Stephen about his report that's going to go to committee in March. I'm assuming, Stephen, that that's a strategic look at our assets and won't go into details as to what's been closed and what's been kept. So that worries me greatly, because you're going to ask us to agree a plan in March, which then leads on to your plan in June, which will close facilities, and we're being asked to vote on that and accept it without knowing what facilities are being closed. And I don't know that I want to do that unless I've got all the information and I'm voting on something so I know what I'm voting on. Thanks.
Stephen, do you want to come in on that? Thank you.
Listen, thanks very much. And thanks, Councillor Shearer, for the question. Yeah, you're right. We are coming back with an interim report in March and a full and final report in June. We'll give as much information as we can. And you're right, it will be higher level. And of course, it's going to be strategic, because we are taking that long-term outcome-based approach. So by definition, it will be strategic. I don't think it will get into the real detail about what assets are going to be core, what assets are going to be flex, what assets are closing. We'll know a bit more detail when we get closer to the time. We're at the very, very start of that journey just now. But listen, we've got nothing to hide here. As I say, communication is one of the guiding principles. We want to be very, very transparent about that, because there's no getting away from the fact that for us to do what we need to do, and I keep repeating it, but it's a smaller, modern core estate that's energy efficient. The only way to do that is to consolidate assets, is for collaboration, is for integrated working, it's for one public estate, and so there will be changes to the footprint of our estate. The extent to which I'll know that by March, I'm not entirely sure at this stage, but there's no hiding from it. We'll give as much information as we can, so it's a really meaningful consultation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to call Councillor Walker next, and I see I've got Councillor Barker and Councillor Faulkner's as up as well. I'm not sure. in what order that came, but I might, if it's okay, I'll go to Councillor Barker first, just because you already did the question, if that's okay. So, Councillor Walker.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was kind of related to Councillor Shearer's. I mean, I assume this is built on the asset review that we did. We did the workshops exercise, and we were looking at that in the context of reprovisioning of libraries and sustainability of halls and facilities. Is this strategic approach going to actually build on the information that we had at that point? And also in terms of your report in March and then June, is that going to then outline how we're reprovisioning some of the library services? And is this, is it sustainable in terms of the money that was allocated through the library's future fund and the transition fund, which in my own ward is allowing Cambuslang to be open for the next 2 years? Because I never really seen an output from any of that in terms of the future of some of these halls and facilities and leisure centres. So is this what we're going to actually see in March and have to make a decision in terms of the reprovision of the libraries, the halls, etc., and what's sustainable and what isn't? Is that when we're kind of finally going to get that sense of direction of where we're going with that? And is the transition fund, etc., is that sustainable for that length of time? The only other thing, the funding aspect of it's been covered. I think that's really important that we see, and you're going to go into talk about that next. So that was, I think that was all I had. Thank you.
So maybe if I could, I'll start with answer that. So and maybe Stephen or Jackie can come in as well. So there are a number of funds. There's the Future Libraries Fund and the Transition Fund, and what that's doing, as you say, in terms of Cambuslang, that's dealing with the mitigations for those libraries that were involved in the savings exercise up to now. I think, and Stephen and Jackie will keep me right here, but the work that Stephen's will come forward is not so much looking at those specific ones, because that's been they're being dealt with through that process, but a much broader and wider look across the whole state. As I say, not just South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, so I'll ultimately include depots and other things like that. But I suppose, and not to steal Stephen's thunder, but the work that councillors and officers were involved in through those sort of workshops, that will form part of the basis of the design. But there's been other work that's been commissioned as well. Is that right?
Yes, so it's broader, but we will get the output from that review that was carried out. Yeah.
So David did steal my thunder. What we're going to say, right? So that's when I talked at the beginning. I thought this is deja vu, and you're right, because this time last year we were talking about something, but that was in response to a particular set of circumstances. We had a real focus on leisure facilities. This is a South Lanarkshire Council strategic review where every single building that we own is in scope. So it's everything that was in scope the last time, plus every other building with school, everything we own, every school. Every community building, everything is in scope just now. The depots, the lot, and it's whether it's managed by us, managed by Leisure Trust, or whether it's managed by the IJB. It's every building we own is currently in scope. It will build upon some of the evidence that we got the last time. To help us analyse the data last time, we got an awful lot of raw data on things which were very property based, about usage, about utility costs, about rateable values, valuations. All that information's feeding into the machine just now. But it's going to come out with different outputs and hopefully better outcomes, because we're taking that much broader perspective this time. And it's going to be quite sophisticated, and we believe that approach will lead us to much better outcomes. And that's what's going to give us that competitive edge, because every local authority, not just in Scotland, but in the UK, are doing this. Every public sector body is doing it. I think the way we are doing it is pretty unique, and it will give us that real competitive edge when we apply for funding. And I'm really confident the outputs and outcomes coming from us will be much better. But this is running in. the stuff that we did last year in the libraries and so on, that's happening just now. But the strategic review I'm talking about, or we're talking about just now, is across every asset owned by the council.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on now to Councillor Barker, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I was just worried about going too far ahead, so cut me off if it's something that's still to come. Mainly, I represent a rural area, and what has been happening is withdrawal from facilities, which isn't surprising because it's not just public facilities, but private businesses which have managed in the past are also pulling out. Not just in the rural area, we've got East Kilbride Centre where things have changed. But the only way forward seems to be communities taking over these facilities, and it is, it's one hell of a responsibility and one hell of a challenge, and I'm not sure, how it's going to go. But there are two ways that this helps, and the first one is communities being able to access funds that are simply denied the council. And a lot of these facilities we know are in poor condition over the years. But the other one is the staffing costs. And quite often I have to explain to communities trying to build up lets of halls. Each let costs more than you ever get in. But one thing that comes up again and again, and Kay will be familiar with this, but certainly to look at in the interim or a transition, is approving certain volunteers to be responsible care holders as the only way that we can keep some of these facilities going. So perhaps I'm going ahead of the discussion, but that is the one obvious thing that we could do to make these facilities viable or more viable. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Councillor Barker, and your points are well made. The case in our next presentation is going to cover some of that. So if it's okay with you, we'll leave it at that. I've got Councillor Faulkner, and then I said I was going to stop the questions there, but just my I suppose my survival instincts kicked in, so I'm going to let Councillor Logan have her question as well, and then we'll move on if that's after that. So Councillor Faulkner, do you want to go first? Thank you.
Aye, fine. Thanks for that. It's Gillian's point and Kay's point as well. In Gillian's strategic intentions, you mentioned about groups in need to increase, including areas of deprivation. We have one in Hull House. It's Hamel West there. It used to be Hull House till we got a university. And we're closing, and you're well aware, Chair, we're closing a library there's part-time staff. We're using the transformation fund to refloor it, to make it for let. We're sitting with 7 rooms in there, and I left the other day, that are lying empty and no booked. And here we're getting another room. We also done it with the creche, refloored it. We can't even hire out the rooms that we've got now, and we're increasing it. The other issue I have with Hull House, not to be parochial, continually I get in there and there's 2 caretakers on, and my colleagues are emailing to say, I'm doing to my centre today, they've not got a caretaker. 2 caretakers in Hull House. The other issue we got, the youth group were wanting their Christmas party in the Civic. No, you can't book it. You need to go to Universal Connections. We're talking about marketing things, and here we're knocking back things, valuable lets. And as we spoke at the Burn Supper, we have a big hall down the stairs. There's 150 people getting wined and dined. We should be advertising that to generate money, not letting it go elsewhere with that. That's just a point, using the transformation. It's a good use. It's an area of deprivation. Yeah, and it's with Kay's point, our marketing isn't good. We take recently with Jeff Stirling, the Sky presenter, is on the Town Hall. Where's the only advert? It's on the board at the Town Hall. North Lanarkshire, if they've got a show end on, they're advertising round about, they're advertising at Hamilton Racecourse, they're in the programme. We don't market what's on. We're no good at that, and we should be better. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So I'll ask Kay to pick up some of it, because some of them was in sort of operational areas, and I know Kay's got some plans around about the the halls and the space. Just because you specifically asked about this building in here, the difficulty with marketing some of the things in this building here in terms of the spaces down there is actually the cost of running some of those events are much more than the cost of income that you get in. So you actually end up running some of them at a deficit. But I'm happy to pick that up with you separately and do it.
And I said to you before, the civic centres, when you've done weddings or events in the civic centres, a local publican would be providing the licence, right? And the local caterers, like Sarah May, would be providing the caterer. I appreciate if we have to use our staff down the stairs, then they've got to be paid that rate. But local caterers and local publicans can have their own staff in there. Meanwhile, you're getting a hire in a big hall, which is part of the heritage thing. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Hopefully I will cover some of this as we get into the next slide, but probably not all, and maybe not all in the detail that you would like. In terms of the use of the spaces just now and the feeling and the view, they're not as well used as they could be. We recognise that. We recognise that there are times during days, certain times where there isn't necessarily such a high demand for the use of the facilities. We're very mindful, particularly around the halls and the community spaces, of making sure they are there and available for when the community want them. One of the things we are going to look at moving forward is us actually programming activities into the spaces and into the halls too, so that it's got a better provision on opportunities locally for communities, and also hopefully to generate more traffic, more awareness of actually the spaces here and it can be used. With regards to the marketing, I couldn't, as you'd imagine, fully agree that it's not, that it's rubbish or whatever, but we do also recognise we could be doing more and we could push that further. We haven't necessarily been aligned and resourced in a way that would support that. And we've done a lot of work over the last few months to realign within our teams, just shifting existing resource that we already have so that we can start to do more around the marketing and promotion, particularly around the halls. We do recognise sometimes there's an assumption that the communities know the hall's there and that's that. But sometimes there can be, if you don't know what goes on in a hall, you're less likely to then go through the door, know how you're available for booking, etc. So we do want to really raise the profile of the halls, and the bit that I'm going to speak about, we'll talk a little bit around that, so that we can try to do more to help sustain those halls moving forward as well. So there'll be a bit around us starting to maybe programme some activity into spaces, definitely increasing the marketing and promotion. We do market, we do have the billboard. I'd love to have some of the billboard space that North have, but apparently it's not considered polite to go encroach on territory. A lot of the marketing nowadays, of course, is also done online through digital media, etc. And we do that. Again, what we recognise is there's not a real huge expertise that we currently have, and we're working on that in terms of how do we secure that expertise. The teams do it well across what they do, but we'd like to get oversight around that. We want a clear marketing and communication strategy. So we've got all of this in the pipeline to be bringing forward, not recognising that it's rubbish, but recognising that there is room to grow in that. So hopefully you'll see that coming forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take the last question on this from Councillor Logan. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Or David, I don't know if you have to be called Chair today. Basically, the whole presentation's been very good, and the questions and the answers have been very good. But one of the things that I think it was David Shearer said, if it's March, if everything's getting worked up to March, and then, you've got a short window, and then you've been asked to look at stuff. But what happens is the gossip or the fears of people go into overdrive, because it does go out, and then of course you get a big hoo-ha, and people obviously get worried about their work or whatever, or will this shut or will that no shut. So I don't know how we're going to manage it, but I just think it is a very short time span, but I'll be guided. But the other thing, and I wanted to say, Councillor Faulkner rightly would say his area is an area of deprivation, and that'll be right. But there's 4 distinct areas within South Lanarkshire, and I've been saying this for day one of the inception of South Lanarkshire. So can I be assured that consideration has been taken into account that what looks good on a matrix, or if you put it into a computer, they would say, well, if you did this or this, that would happen or this would happen. A depot could get shut because there wouldn't be any detriment to anybody as such. But sometimes if you get people trailing, say, 15 miles to get to a lorry, to trail 15 miles back before they even start their work, that's no maybe showing the best way for us to do our business. So are we understanding that there is 4 distinct areas, and what is deprivation in, say, a crowded area like our Allen's area? We've got areas that I would be quicker going to Edinburgh than try to up the back roads and try to get to Lead Hills, which is on South Lanarkshire. So that's my biggest worry, is that if we put things into a computer or we work at stuff or we look at stuff, our officers think, oh, it might be good to get everybody compacted to one bit. On a piece of paper, maybe, but in reality, no. And that's one of my concerns. And my other concern is, how do we get out to the public and time-wise and no cause, because there was great angst, I know, last year, staff and various different people worried about, would their place shut, what would happen, what wouldn't happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Logan. I'll pass on to Stephen. I think, again, not to steal Stephen's turn, but we're talking about a longer term approach here. Thank you.
Councillor Logan, thanks for the questions. There were quite a few in there, and I'll try and cover them. If I don't cover them, please come back to me. In terms of consultation, the first part of consultation is going to commence immediately after we report to committee in March, and we'll get the results of that before we go back to committee in June. But remember, this is a 10-year approach. Consultation and a 10-year strategy, and the things that we'll be doing over that 10 years won't start and stop in between the committee meetings. There'll be ongoing consultation for a lifetime of the strategy. And you know what? That's something that we'll be guided by committee on. I mean, consultation will continue until members think, well, as long as members think it's useful to do so, and it's something we're happy to do. We'll deploy as many different methods of consultation as we can. I'm keen to do it the old-fashioned way as well, where Craig won't thank me for it, but me and him get out and we go around in as many wards as possible and do it at a ward level to give assurance and confidence that we're taking account of local factors. It won't be a case of computer says no. That's absolutely not the approach. It'd have been awful easy to have dusted off the old reports and see how they did it previously, and it was probably going to be what Nick's the building in, how many folk turn up, and what level of investment is required to bring it up to that, to bring it up to a standard. You could have put that through the computer and come up with a solution, but they've been the wrong solution if we want to create long-term sustainable solutions. So deprivation data is one of the things that will definitely be taken into account. Location and rurality, if I can spit that word out, is also definitely going to be taken into account. And we're going to use them in addition to conditioning and location. Rurality will all be taken into account to try and attract investment into remote areas and deprived areas, as long as it's the right thing to do. And I can absolutely give you that assurance. So consultation will start in March. It will stop in May to allow us to get a report to committee, but that isn't the end of it. It's ongoing and constant. There'll be various forms of consultation. It will definitely take account of unique factors. Clydesdale in itself, that big rural area, has lots of different complexities. So you can't just assume that everybody in Clydesdale's got the same factors. We understand that, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. So hopefully I can give you confidence that it will be something that will be unique to South Lanarkshire, and that's why we're confident that this will give us a competitive edge that we need. But again, to rein it back in, it's very, very important that being honest from the very beginning. There's lots of reasons why we're doing it. We know our estate is getting older. We know we need to invest in. We talked about this not too long ago. Last time when we spoke about the LHE strategy, we talked about needing £900 million to bring our estate up to standard by 2045. Now, that doesn't stay still. That always increases. we don't have that money and there's no obvious levels of funding. So we're going to need a smaller but more modern core estate. And we're going to have to be honest with people what we're doing, why we're doing it, and when we intend to do it. But more importantly, how we do it. And we will be consulting with people to try bring people with us, hopefully, but understanding the uniqueness of South Lanarkshire, which makes it so interesting.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Stephen. So with that, I think if it's okay, my elected members will move on, because I know people will be keen to hear Kay when she talks about our budget position for the forthcoming year. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So the final set of slides from me, I suppose, really just following on from having covered that broader 3-year budget planning. I wanted to take the opportunity to brief members on what year one of that plan will look like and how we'll address that budget gap for the coming year. So the projected budget gap for the coming year is £481,000. That's assuming the static management fee from South Lanarkshire Council and acknowledging the remaining uncertainty just now around the employer national insurance contribution. So that has not been factored in at this point just now. As with previous years, we've looked at the options that are available to us to address the budget. These include increased income generation, general efficiencies, and some transformational changes where we have the opportunity to do so. So there are a few routes to increase income generation, starting with pricing. In determining the pricing, consideration has to be given to the balance to be struck between increasing income, balancing the overall budget to help sustain service provision, and allowing the maintenance of high levels of accessibility for community use. A benchmarking group undertook work through May, June and July this year to establish where our pricing points sat in relation to both our geographical local authority neighbours and also our local government benchmarking comparator authorities. We also benchmarked against private operators where these organisations offered similar products and services to help determine suitable pricing models for the coming year. Consultation was then undertaken on the potential price increases ranging from 2% through to 6%. That consultation ran through October and November with over 6,700 responses from individuals and community groups. Consultation responses indicated that people were generally happy to pay more to help sustain the services provided, with only a minority disagreeing with suggested percentage price increases. An impact assessment was also completed and considered by the board when agreeing price levels for the year ahead. Taking all of that into consideration, the board agreed to price increases of an average of 3%, which we'll start to communicate early in the new year, giving more time and notice to customers. For some areas, the information also indicated that some products could tolerate slightly higher increases, those being fitness memberships, swimming lessons and golf, more around the 5% mark for those particular products. These percentage increases are in line or less than previous years, which is a good position for us to be in. The other area that we look at here in terms of increased income is around gift aid. So we'll be proactive in making full use of our charitable status by making more use of gift aid, which is a government scheme that lets charities claim tax relief on donations that are made to them and lets us claim an additional 25 pence for every £1 under gift aid. The mechanisms for this will be implemented as soon as possible to help generate some of that additional income in the new year, focusing on the zoo first. We'll then assess the opportunities to implement this across other service areas where applicable. The third area in terms of our income generation is in relation to booking fees, which were introduced throughout the current year, and we'll continue to implement them next year, generating additional income and bringing us in line with the industry practice that's widely accepted. If we then move on to our other options, the next area that we look at is efficiencies. And having done so for many years now, this gets harder to do without significant implications across the business and indeed has stifled the ability to grow some areas of the business historically. Nonetheless, we've identified savings around licence and fleet and printing. So following a review of requirements, it's proposed that our admin budgets relating to printing and licensing costs are reduced based on the introduction of some new systems that would reduce some of the need for the printing. Additionally, removal of public performance licence costs that are deemed surplus to our operational needs. And also based on review of requirements, it's been identified the total number of fleet vehicles that we work with can also be reduced. We've identified savings in our structure, reducing administration posts in anticipation of transformation fund projects that reduce administration requirements. And we'll continue to make sure we're making full use of any tax relief that is afforded to us, particularly in relation to cultural facilities. And the team are working through this with legal to check if there's anything that we might be eligible for that we are not yet claiming. So we'll continue to pursue that to make sure that we're not missing out on anything that we should be able to be obtaining. And our final area for consideration is then around transformational change. So that is about embracing the use and advances in technology that will allow us to introduce a new front of house system. That will alter the customer facing processes and take advantage of the new technologies, including our SLLC app and extending leisure centre access gates, etc., to streamline the number of staff involved with admin and reception areas. We're also aiming to increase our capacity to service unmet demand in halls, which perhaps come back to Councillor Barker's point earlier, which we know has been a real pressure point in the last few months. We're looking to address that through the introduction of a remote access system that will increase days and times that halls can be accessed by the community. So it wouldn't necessarily always require a member of SLLC staff to be present in order for the community to access the hall. We would look to do that not through other custodians of keys, but through electronic keypad entry linked to access codes, etc. So there's a whole system behind that we need to implement and put in place to take that forward. It is anticipated that that could allow more lets, it could accommodate more lets across those upgraded sites. And the implementation of this is linked to the wider Transformation Fund programmes and projects that I'm sure councillors will be aware of. All of that really is about trying to future-proof the business, increase customer access and enhance the customer experience. So those are the three key ways and the three options that we have to explore in this coming year. We have done that and we've worked up proposals around that, which give us comfort that there's plenty of options there to be able to address the budget gap for the coming year. We will look to go out to consultation around the different pieces and other parts around that. The other part I wanted to cover off was in terms of the review of the hall's business model. Often we hear mixed viewpoints from councillors, customers and others. We hear that for some the prices are considered to be too expensive and maybe that's why people don't use them as much as they potentially could. And on the other hand, there are views that we should be covering our costs to help ensure that we can sustain these halls moving into the future for communities. So we're undertaking the review with a view to growing income in this area of the business. The remote access to the halls will support this to some extent and further options are also being considered. As a broad view of the halls just now, existing booking information shows that they operate in a very heavily subsidised model. 90% of all lets pay a reduced price for the use of their halls currently. At the lowest end, some lets generate an income of only £2.40 per hour, while staffing costs alone can be in the region of £15 per hour. And only 3% of all the lets at the moment are actually commercial activity lets. So even having started to do the scoping and that work to get the picture of what it currently looks like is really, really helpful information for us. As you would expect any adjustment to that model, it does require us to be mindful of the need to secure additional income and full cost recovery where appropriate, while continuing to support accessibility and community use, and we don't want to lose sight of that. Our consideration, therefore, is to simplify the pricing categories, recognising there's a complex range of pricing categories at the moment, and at times inconsistent or incorrect application of halls charges, with some users paying less than they potentially should at times. We'll accompany any changes to the halls with additional support around marketing and promotion and programming of activities where appropriate to help support successful outcomes for local communities. Consultation will take place. We anticipate launching the consultation next week and running that over the course of December and January. Again, we'll develop an impact assessment for consideration by the board in February. And we'll look at early communication with all users to be undertaken to allow a reasonable lead-in time for any changes, allowing users to prepare as needed if there's any changes there around that. There will be a continued look at the halls and consideration of the halls. There's quite a lot to unpack in there, but at the same time, we are aware of impact on communities. So just now it's felt that if we can recategorise some of the pricing, look to introduce the remote access and push more on the programming and the promotion of the halls, we're hoping that will generate, and we'll look to take that as a new baseline and then see where we can push on again from there. The final slide for me that I was keen to cover is around our future growth plans. We've all, ourselves and the council, been faced with really difficult financial challenges that have had to be addressed, which have required us really to spend a lot of time and energy considering efficiencies and reductions, etc. And I wanted to take the opportunity to hopefully provide councillors with some comfort that we do see good opportunities to grow some areas of the business and to expand a little further on our growth plan, which is underway, with a view to delivering benefits over the next 3 years and then beyond. We'll aim to diversify the income streams, looking at sponsorship opportunities, corporate memberships, expanding our filming income and targeting new markets. Additionally, we will increase our cross-promotion and selling across all of our services, selling to audiences we already have in one area of the business so that they use more of our services across all areas of the business and more often. We'll further develop the full use of our charitable status, optimising the gift aid that I mentioned earlier, and being proactive regarding donations at museums, zoo and cultural venues initially, while exploring opportunities across libraries and leisure services too. We'll explore additional sources of income from funders such as Sports Scotland, Creative Scotland and others, and I take on board the councillor's point earlier about recognition of, look, their budgets are squeezed also. We do see some potential availability around the creative side of that just now, so we're looking to explore that, and of course we will look at others beyond that. We'll pursue partnership with commercial organisations, so we will be aligning our programmes and our community initiatives undertaken so that they are part of the corporate social responsibility and the regenerative strategies of private companies. So we would like to tap into that and explore that. Franchising and vending enhancement will look to achieve economies of scale around that, and opportunities for the expansion of events and hospitality will be developed. All of these will be pursued over all 3 years of the business plan, appreciating some of these opportunities will take more time to realise than others. But overall, that shift to medium-term financial planning is a positive step for both ourselves and the council, and it's encouraging that there's more sustainable business model underpinning our service provision. Additionally, that potential for growth will be maximised, but we do remain realistic, acknowledging that the extent to which we can realise that is dependent upon the wider financial pressures that may be put upon the budget in future years. I hope that has been helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kate. Elected members, we've got about 20 minutes or so to cover any questions, and I see Councillor McClymont's hands up. Do you want to come in? You're in mute, Councillor McClymont.
Sorry, I wanted to get in early because I've got another meeting I need to head to. So it was just about what Kate explained about the keyless entry. That kind of contradicts what I was trying to do at a certain hall that's closed for the users, because I was told that it wasn't safe due to the demographics. So that kind of doesn't sit well with me. How we can say for some people then you can have a keyless entry, and for others you're saying you can't have it. So I don't know how we would get around the health and safety issues there that you obviously highlighted for that particular hall and the people who were using it. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned, but maybe it's under the vending or whatever, is what I said a couple of years ago when you closed down the cafes. Those areas are sitting empty. We could be using them, we could be franchising them out to, in my area, Lanark, for instance, I was always saying that Healthy Valleys could perhaps have taken on that opportunity to see how it works. And it's a small cafe, so that kind of thing might work, see how it works, and then we can get some income in from that. It also helps the customers, because we have a Parkinson's group who relied on that to sit there and have a chat after their sessions in the health suite. So that's something else that I would like to see Leisure taking that on board as well. Thanks.
Oh, okay, can you come in? Thanks.
Thanks for that, Councillor. In terms of the specific call that you're referring to, I'm happy to pick that up offline if that's helpful. The entry that we're looking at here all falls off actually some of the benefits of the transformation fund that the council made available, and so we're looking at putting in new systems in the background that would then allow the likes of the electronic access codes that would then be one-time use codes, etc. Again, if I think back to when I first joined South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, and going back to Councillor Barker's point again, there was discussion at the time, I do recall, and I think it probably has been a discussion that's probably happened many times over a number of years around other custodians of keys. Those ideas and suggestions were taken forward. However, the level of risk around that and then potential liability around insurance didn't seem to marry up historically. As we're developing this new proposal, we are working with the Council's risk team, but also the insurers to talk them through, here's the process, here are the safeguards that we will put in place around this too, so that we actually would look to apply that. We wouldn't look to make a differentiation between any different areas or areas of, I can't remember what the term was, Councillor, apologies. We wouldn't be looking to make any differentiation around that. We would be looking at the halls that are identified to be upgraded through those new systems. There will be some lets that will always require some of our staff to be present, particularly around the likes of events, parties, etc. We probably see it being more beneficial where we have regular users, because they can be briefed in health and safety procedures, we can get everything in line for them, and then they could be allowed that regular access on that basis. So we have some safeguards we need to put in place to keep us right, but there wouldn't be a differentiation from areas. It would be more around perhaps the type of event that would be happening there. To pick up on the point around the cafes as well, so the intention really was always around, okay, the cafes weren't being used to the extent that would have made them viable, hence the previous decisions around that, and we were hopeful always to keep the spaces, recognising that social element is really important for users. We are looking at the franchising piece, and that work has been ongoing over the last 6 or 8 months just now. And picking up on your point around, look, we've got elements of franchising just now, we've got elements where we provide some of those services direct ourselves. So we're conducting a bit of a review on, look, what works, and it's not one size fits all, as I'm sure all councillors would agree. It has to be what's right for that area. But where we do have small offerings for franchising, generally there is not a big uptake. There's not a lot of interest, particularly if they are not shown to necessarily generate a profit for any company or organisation or group looking to take it in. What we want to do in those cases is then look at where might we be able to package up a number of options, and somebody might then want to take that on. So that could be a package that has options that do generate income mixed with profit, mixed with some that may not. But in the round, there's a win in there, and it would mean we would still get some coverage in some of those areas that wouldn't necessarily be profit generating. So we've got work ongoing around those areas, which is something again that we're taking forward, mixed with where are we providing some of that catering, etc., ourselves directly, and what do we think those best options are. So I appreciate the point, and I suspect where this is coming later than you would have hoped, but hopefully there's good news, and that there's work underway already that will hopefully come to conclusion in the next few months. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you very much.
I'll get one offline about the hall in particular. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McClement. I've got Councillor Ross and then Councillor Robb. So Councillor Ross first.
Yes, I'd just like to thank Kay for our presentation. It's a huge task. The very fact that they only get a certain money from the council, and then they've got to try and make that up in other ways as well. I'm just glad I'm not in your position, Kay. It would be a horrible job to be trying to do this at the present time. Just one question. You did mention the increase in costs. I know that last year we increased the active age quite substantially from 80 to 120. Do you have any recent figures to show whether that was a successful move or whether it hasn't been as successful as you thought it might have been?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ross. Kay.
Thanks for that. And I suppose it goes back to your earlier point, Councillor, around where are we moving in the commercial piece, and how do we know if we're being successful around that? The Active Age has been a huge success. We've got higher numbers of Active Age members than we had previously. We haven't seen a drop off, which was always the fear around that. And we do think a part in that was, of course, affording the opportunity to pay it on a monthly basis rather than this big lump sum at the start of the year. So we've generated more memberships around that. So it's looking positive. We continue to monitor that each year with all the price increases or any proposals that we take forward. As you can imagine, we monitor them closely over the course of the year just to check if they are delivering. Equally, if we were to find in any given year that something has had a really adverse effect, we wouldn't be waiting until a year's time to change that. We would look to take a bit of an intervention to undo anything that was potentially an unintended consequence. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks again for the presentation, Kay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robb, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, afternoon. Thanks for all your work, everyone. Just a quick question about, you talked about keyless access to halls, but are you considering keyless access to pitches as well?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rob Kay.
I think this is our sort of first foray into this, so we'll start with this, and then I think it lets us see, maybe iron out some of the bumps in the road. No introduction of any new system is ever seamless, and then look at, yes, where else might that be applicable. The benefits that we think are there to be gained for the community are definitely worth looking at how we would roll that out. We have the benefit of the capital funding through the Council's Transformation Fund, and I think if this tests and tests well and produces that, there's maybe always an option to come back and discuss further rollout. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. So I've got 3 more questions coming up. I've got Councillor Faulkner, Councillor Walker and Councillor Marshall. Councillor Faulkner, do you want to come in?
Hi, Chair. Just 2 quick questions. I take it you mentioned it, and I might have missed it when I was out, about user groups having access to the hall without an employer. Is there no insurance implications in that?
You did miss it when you popped out. Yeah, there are. So what I was saying is I think historically, this is just a modern version of this with a bit of tech. Historically, it's been about other local people having been custodians of keys to open up. And the reason that was never really taken forward previously was for that very reason, the concerns around risk, liability, insurance. As we've been developing this proposal, we've been working with the council risk team, but also our insurers and meeting with them to talk them through, here's how we think it can work. Here are the safeguards that we will put in place around that. And that's what I was saying earlier, is that we think it probably would have most use for regular let users. So we can brief in the health and safety, we can do all of that, cover all the bases, and they can regularly access it. There are some occasions where there will always be a member of our staff required, parties, events, one-off bookings, etc. So it's just that mix, and it's just making sure we can get to a reasonable comfort level, and that we are mitigating and safeguarding against some of those risks. But the good thing about the process to date has been working with the risk team and working with the insurers as we go along.
Just a quick second one, and it's just a point. I recently attended the Sports Council meeting, and I was quite surprised to see a lot of their affiliation fees have not been paid by groups. And the Sports Council are paying £18 for the use of Whitehall's, I think. But I noticed SLLC owe affiliation fees of £2,000 to the Sports Council. Are you aware of that?
SLLC, as in ourselves, owing the Sports Council money? Is that the question?
Over £2,000, which
Not that I'm aware of. I know that we administer funds on behalf of the Sports Council, so it might be maybe the funds coming into us and then being transferred over, maybe something around that. But I'm certainly happy to pick that up with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Faulkner. Councillor Walker, do you want to come in?
Hey, thanks, Chair. Just once again, thanks very much for the presentation. It's given me a bit of a broader view and insight as to where we're heading in terms of the approach. But I really kind of look forward to, in terms of phase 1, scoring of all SLC assets to be disinvest, disposal, all the measures that we were talking about. I'm really hoping then we'll get a wee bit more detail on some of this when the paper goes to committee in March. And also, yeah, there's a bit more information in terms of the growth plan and the funding, but I do feel we spoke about funding in every presentation workshop that I've been at. So again, hopefully we'll maybe get a bit more detail around that in terms of specific funding sources you might be targeting, what your target income level is. I mean, I know there's new staff that are going to be working specifically around that, a funding team. So we would be looking for, a projected growth figures, milestones in terms of income raising and what you think a reasonable target would be there. So, as I say, thank you for this. I mean, it's been useful, but there's a slight degree of frustration out there. I'm constantly getting asked by, the community council, the neighbourhood group, what's the final plan, not just for my own library, but across South Lanarkshire. And I'm still, other than Canvas Lang, which, yes, isn't a kind of holding pattern just now for 2 years, well, we got on with looking at how we move towards a community hub, and that's fine. But in terms of being able to answer, in terms of the broader review, I'm still going out there and I'm no more knowledgeable than I was a year ago. So it's just to say, I'm really trying not to be cheeky here. I don't mean to be, but just to say it would be really, really helpful if come March we have some of the detail, we have some of the meeting. I can go out there and say to people, look, this is what we're doing. This is what we're thinking in relation to this building or that library. And get some views on that. So, but thank you. It's given me a broader idea in the sense of direction. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Walker. I'll ask Kay or Stephen if they want to quickly comment. And I am conscious we've only got sort of less than 10 minutes left, and we've got 2 more questions. What I would say is in terms of South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, in terms of its funding, exactly the same as the council. Some of this is down to the nature of you don't know what your funding is until a certain time of the year.
I'm talking about as a charitable status and how you're going to access which is the whole reason in being a charity. So I'm not talking about, the reason in being a charity is to try and, offset some of the constraints that the council's working under. It gives you a broader landscape, if you like, to actually fundraise.
It absolutely does. The main reason for being a charitable is around about non-domestic rates relief, if I'm being entirely honest around that. But is there any very quick points you want to make?
Yeah. What the report in March will try and do is give as much detail as we can about PPPP, and I don't know who can remember what that is. I can't. No, it's that I wrote it in proposed prioritised pipeline of projects. That's where we want to get to. We want to get as close to that as we can. We're very, very start of this journey. Nobody else has done this just now, so we're trying to do that in this clear, consistent way, and we're working towards it. But we'll give as much information as we can, and we'll consult on as widely as we can as well once we've got the information available.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. So I'll take two final questions, and then hopefully that will get us away at 4 o'clock as planned. I've got Councillor Mars, and then I've got Councillor Shearer. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, it was just three quick points. Just actually, maybe referring to what Councillor Walker was saying there as well. That alongside the commissioning plan that you've talked about, and a complete copy of that would be ideal. In addition to the slides today, that and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that I've seen a copy of the business plan for South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. Certainly that I know it's been referenced in a recent committee, and perhaps it's something I've missed, but certainly a copy of that business plan would be really useful for me, and probably give more information about the final destination, so to speak. But also just specifically on the consultation going forward. I mean, obviously the consultation will be robust and consult in several different ways, and it's really important that is robust and people have confidence in that process, and for it to be place-based and not just purely based on the numbers of responses given the population differences across localities, and the dependency on health and well-being that assets may provide for communities. So I'm just looking for an assurance that it will be absolutely place-based and take that into consideration. And also the staffing at the moment, that all the assets that are obviously going to be scored, are we sure that those are purely absolutely accessible now? Because I know that last time round, that certainly in my private capacity trying to let a hall in Clydesdale, I was openly told on the phone that the only one I could have was Leigh Hills. That was the only one that was actually available because there was no staff. There was no staff for them, and they couldn't be let. And at the time I did ask that individual, are you recording the requests for lets that can't actually be met through staffing issues? And no, it wasn't at that point. So I think that's really important, because I know that obviously the scoring of any asset will be down to use. That has to be part of the consideration going forward. But if people can't actually access the asset because there's no staff currently to facilitate that, I think that's something we also need to be aware of.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Mars. In terms of some of the points you asked about the commissioning plan, the commissioning plan is a work in progress. So you'd said if it could be sent out, it's not ready yet. That we're saying that we're working our way through that through the commissioning plan. You had asked about the business plan. I don't think that's been to board yet, but I'll pass that over to Kay. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for that. Yeah, so the business plan is what we're developing, that 3-year plan that we've talked through here. The intention is that we take that to board in February for agreeal or approval from board. Again, there's some factors in that I've outlined in the presentation, that there's still some uncertainty around the employer's national insurance contributions being one of those. So we'll look to firm that up in the coming weeks and get a final version of that over to board for approval. As I said, we are working closely with the council and Jackie and the team to make sure that we've both got sight of that. But the first port of call for that would be to board for approval. The other piece, I suppose, is just in terms of the halls that you mentioned there as well, and the staffing issue, and I'd referred to in the presentation, there is a bit of a pressure point and has been in the last couple of months around that. The electronic entry system is something that we do hope will facilitate just what you're outlining there, Councillor, that unmet demand. To see that, because even with full staffing capacity, we're not staffed up at any point to allow or be able to support community access at all hours of all days. So even with full staffing capacity, it still puts a natural limitation on it. And my hope would be that if we can get the keyless entry system in place, then actually that expands the days and the times and the number of hours that the community are able to access that. However, while we're waiting in that in the interim, we are pushing on with the recruitment piece. We're covering through casuals and other staff where we possibly can too. And we will keep on doing that with some recruitments underway already that should come to completion early on in the new year that will help fill some of those gaps that we have just now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And final question is Councillor Shearer. Thank you.
Thank you, David. One question, one suggestion. Question over the libraries. Is there a separate strategy being looked at as to what we want to do with our libraries, given that they can't be bookstores anymore? They've got to evolve into digital information hubs, places where people can fill out online forums with some assistance going forward. And I think that's a vital strategy that needs to be looked at and implemented to give libraries a future and a new route for them to go down to help preserve their library service. And the suggestion, has anybody at the leisure halls looked at these parcel pick-up and drop-off points that are appearing here, there and everywhere besides supermarkets? Is there any income in that? Could they be fitted to the side of a village hall to generate a little bit of income, which might make things a little easier for the Leisure Trust? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shearer. I know that the libraries are included within the overarching piece of work that Stephen's leading on, but you're right to say some of the work that will spill out from that needs to have a kind of particular sector or business approach to it. So there is something around that about what does the library of the future look like. In terms of you're talking about things like Amazon Locker and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure if that's been looked at, but that's certainly a good idea, and any ideas are welcome. I don't know, Stephen or Kay, is there anything else you want to add to that? No. But we'll take on, Kay will take on board your suggestion in terms of the lockers and look into that. I'm conscious it is now just coming up for 4 o'clock, so Robert will be proud of me that I've managed to do this within the timescale that's been set. We'll do this again as we go through. There's a lot, and there's been a lot of really, I think, useful questions that's came to us. So officers remain as ever open to any other questions that you might have out with this forum, and at key stages throughout this process. It's a huge undertaking, but I think it's taken off as often a kind of positive strain. So with that, I just thank you for your attendance this afternoon. So thank you very much. Bye.